this as simple and as quick as possible, not draw it out too much. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, you know the DBQ counts for 25% of the test on AP US history. You have an hour to write it, and let's just go through what you need to do and make it as simple as we possibly can. Okay. Now there's 7 total points you can get from it, and we're trying to build up points in the AP exam. You're not going to be perfect, and you don't have to be, and you can still earn a 4 or 5 and get college credit. But in the DBQ, you have your thesis, context, analyzing the documents, evidence beyond the documents, sourcing, and complexity. In a nutshell, your thesis statement and your context really should go first. And your thesis statement doesn't have to appear anywhere in specific, like an MLA paper where it goes at the end of your first of your intro paragraph. But they need to work together because most people already remember it that way anyway, and it just flows better. So again, context is just your intro. It's your background. It's what led up to this prompt that you have drawn. Okay, what led up to this event we're about to analyze or write about and talk about. Okay, within about 50 or 200 years in AP US history. Your thesis statement is simply your position, your defensible position. One sentence with your argumentative, your defensive position with your evidence you're going to use to support that position with. That's all it is. Again, we're writing an argumentative style where we are going to take a clear stance, a clear line of reasoning, and then we're going to support that with a piece of evidence or two that we're going to argue and support that prompt with. Okay, so down here we have a sample thesis statement, and I'm going to show you kind of how we write thesis statements. You can do this, you don't have to. Let's say this prompt is, to what extent was no taxation without representation, a cause of the American Revolution, which I believe that's what that prompt is saying. Kind of paraphrase it a little bit. But I would create mine with a counter argument, and we'll talk about more what the counter argument is. In your essay, you can get a point, a complexity point, for trying to find some type of an argument that you can run contrary to whatever your prompt says. So this prompt is saying that no taxation without representation was a cause of the American Revolution. Well, my regular thesis, I guess you could say, starting with here, the colonial resistance to the British regulations in the years from 1763 through 1776 were summarized by the statement, no taxation without representation, as the colonists did not want to be directly taxed with a representative in Parliament. All right, so right here I've got my position right there, the first part. That is my position, an argumentative, defensible, clear line of reasoning. I'm saying the colonial resistance to British regulations from those years were summarized by that statement, no taxation without representation. My position. I'm not just restating the prompt. You don't just restate the prompt in AP. You come up with your own position related to that prompt, which I did here, and then you have to have some type of piece of evidence, a concept or a term sprinkled in that you are going to use to support that argument that's related to the prompt. Now, my piece of evidence or my something specific is they didn't want to be directly taxed without a representative in Parliament. Okay, there's what I'm going to argue about. All right, there's what I'm going to write about. I've got my position, my thesis statement, and then I've got something that I'm actually going to use that is concrete, concept, or a piece of term or two that you're going to support it with. Now, the very beginning, this dependent clause, for your English people out there, you can build in a counter argument in your thesis. It's probably the easiest way to do it. That way, when you get ready for that part of your essay, you've already got it built into your thesis statement. So while I'm going to argue this for sure and support it and all that, I'm also somewhere going to talk about not everybody supported that. Not everybody wanted to rebel. Not everybody had a problem with the British taxes, and over 20% of colonial subjects were loyalists. But that is a thesis statement. It is a clear line of reasoning. It is taking a position that is defensible and argumentative, and then having some type of concrete term or terms, or in this case a concept, that you can argue and support the prompt. That is a thesis statement. Just don't make it harder than it has to be. All right, you can build in that counter argument if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to. Okay? So again, context is just simply background. 50 to 100 years, what led us to this point, what got to the point, to the prompt that we're talking about, your thesis statement, your position, clear line of reasoning that you can support with some type of piece of evidence, a term, or a concept in there. Document analysis. All right, so you're going to have 7 documents on the AP DBQ portion, and you can analyze 3 of them and get 1 point, or analyze at least 6 of the 7 to get 2 points. Well, Mr. Ganser, what does that mean to analyze the documents? Well, there are going to be 7 documents that are going to be related to the prompt. Document could be a map, it could be a picture, it could be a journal entry, it could be some type of other piece of writing, historical primary source. Again, it could be a writing, it could be a map, it could be a graphic, it could be a picture. It's something that's related to the prompt that you've got to take 6 of those, or at least 3. I always tell my students to do all of them, that way in case you mess up, to get the points. Now, what does it mean to analyze those specifically? Well, you were trying to, again, to explain how each of those sources are related to the prompt, okay? So you have to address them first. So the best way to do that is to group the documents. Before you start writing this exam, DBQ, take 10-15 minutes and read the prompt, read the sources. Let's go look at a few real sources, if that's not it, up top here. Now, these are real sources that you could see. This is a map of the proclamation line, the Quebec Act. These are images of Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley. That's related, obviously, to this time period, 1763 to 1783, in regards to how relations changed. This is a document as well. Again, it's just an image. You have a document right here that's actually from an excerpt from the Declaration of Rights of Man. You have other documents. Again, these are writing. This is from a letter from Alexander Hamilton, talking about the National Bank. These are the types of documents that I mean. You might have some like this that are writing. This may just be a picture. Read the whole document. Look at the image. Look at the print below it. What year is it from? What does it say? Who is in it? What's the name of the people? Understand the documents, okay? And here's another thing. The documents can also help you answer the prompt. Sometimes you may vaguely remember, but after reading the prompt, it'll throw some terms, in there sometimes, like, oh yeah, I remember that. It might help you answer the prompt. So when you get ready to analyze these documents, and you've read them and you understand them, try to group them together based on, the historical theme. For example, maybe one of them is, maybe the 2 or 3 documents are related. Maybe they are more in agreement, and maybe these 2 or 3 documents are more in disagreement. Maybe you could group them together that way. Or maybe, again, this is an economic document, and so is document 5. Say document 1 and 5 are both economic documents, so I'm going to use those together in one paragraph and put those together. However you decide to group the documents, it's really a lot easier if you will group them, or just group them some way. Just say, hey, these 1, 3, and 5 are connected, so I'm going to use them. Maybe documents 7 and 4 are related, so I'm going to use those 2 together. But that's one way you can do it. And you have to address the document in your writing. And I know some people are going to say this is elementary to just say document 3 reflects document 3 reflects document 4 claims. You can do it like that and literally go, as far as I know, there's nothing that actually explicitly says that, oh, well, you can't do that. As long as you're addressing the document, you're explaining the document, and then also explaining how it's related to the prompt, you're going to get the credit, okay? Some people will write, I'm just going to say this is a bunch of writing. They'll write a bunch of writing. I shouldn't do that. Some people will cite the documents after they get finished writing and explaining and analyzing the documents. So let's just say, for example, you wrote a bunch. You wrote, several paragraphs, you at least wrote a paragraph or two. Some people may do document 3 and 4. You could do that after the writing. That would suffice. But you do have to acknowledge that where you use the document. Again, you are explaining how the documents. First of all, you're acknowledging them, explaining them, and then explaining how they're related to the prompt. Okay. So, and you can say document 3. You can say, you can begin with it. Documents 2 and 3 reflect, and then whatever. You go into explaining what they're reflecting, what they're stating, or what's going on in the document, and then you spend some time tying that back to how it's related to the prompt. I'm spelled reflect wrong. Okay, there's a couple ways you do it. So, document analysis, again, you can get 2 points. Let me go back down to it. Analyzing documents, you can get 2 points if you correctly analyze at least 6 to 7 documents. And again, you have to address the documents, explain the documents, and then explain how they're related. It's really not that difficult. Try to group the documents together however you can. Or you can literally just go through each document. There's nothing that says you can't do that. I know it may seem elementary. I know some people might be saying things like, well, the documents don't talk. I get all that. English teachers, I teach English. But at the end of the day, they are looking for you to acknowledge the document in your essay, to cite it somewhere, to explain the documents, and also connect them to how they're related to the prompt. That is analysis. Not just explaining it, but explaining how it is connected to the prompt. Okay, do that for 6 or 7 of them. And let's go back to these prompts here, looking at these. And these are just 2 examples. Explain the competing philosophical views on the organization and task of the new government. Okay, so obviously we're talking about the Articles of Confederation, going into the the Constitutional Convention, the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, that some people wanted a stronger government, some people wanted a more nationalized economy, and some people wanted to stay just like it was. And of course, you see right here, if I'm a history student, I see Richard Henry Lee. I already know where he stands, and of course, you'll read it. And he's obviously talking about, he is concerned about the new Constitution possibly trampling the rights of individuals and states. Okay? And then, of course, you have this perspective over here, talking about the Articles of Confederation were very loose and really led to stalemate. So these two would have differing perspectives. So if I were reading through the documents and these two were there, I probably wouldn't group these together. I would probably group these separately, since they have at least a differing perspective. And on this one, let's just pretend this is document 1. I could say, in document 1, address my document. Richard Henry Lee is addressing his concerns about the newly created Constitution and how it doesn't adequately address the rights of citizens and states. Richard Henry Lee, like a lot of people from Virginia, were a lot of anti-federalists, were skeptical of the new Constitution because it didn't have a specific Bill of Rights. This, of course, would be an example. This document is an example of a conflicting personality or points of views in the Constitutional Convention, because you had some people who were in support of the Constitution and more federal rights and increases in the government, such as Alexander Hamilton, but people such as Richard Henry Lee and George Mason were, as this document reflects, were skeptical. That's how you do it. I addressed it, I explained it, I connected it. That's all you're doing, okay? Back to our next part. Most of your paper is going to be analyzing the documents, okay? So again, analyze at least 6 documents. You need to address the documents, point them out, explain them, and connect them, and try to group them together, if nothing else, based on how related they are. Maybe they agree. Or maybe you can group them based on a historical theme. Maybe they're both economic, or this one's social, or whatever. The next point will be from evidence beyond the documents. All right, you got your prompt, and you got all your documents. You're trying to find something that's not already in the documents that you can bring in and connect to the prompt. Okay? Give you an example. Let's go back up here to these prompts right here. Right here. how did the American Revolution impact other parts of the world? All right. So I see this. I see, of course, this is the Santo Domingo Revolution in Haiti, where they overthrew the French, Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. All right, both of these are related to the French. Now, to be sure, the American Revolution certainly inspired them. They wanted to overthrow oppressive governments. They wanted to establish some type of a constitutional system and get rid of the monarchy and all that good stuff. All right, now I'm thinking here, what is something that's not mentioned in these documents that I could use to support and is related to this prompt? Oh, Latin American revolutions. How about the revolutions in South America? Ah, there you go. That's what evidence beyond the documents are. You're just trying to find something that's not already in the documents that you can use to argue and support that. That's all it is. Now, you can't just point it out. You've got to explain it. Everything you have to explain, argue, relate it back to the prompts. You can't just say, the revolutions in Bolivia would be an example of another revolution that was inspired by the United States. But that wouldn't be enough. You got to really explain, really sell them on the fact that the American Revolution did inspire, how it did, why it did, the ideas of the Enlightenment, and creating a declaration that, and eventually a constitution that protects the rights of people and promotes, federalism and separation of powers and limited government, all that stuff. Okay. So again, find something not already in the documents that's related that you can argue it. Okay. Document sourcing. All right. So this one sounds complicated, but it's not. There's a couple of ways you can get this point, and there's different historical skills that you can use to source documents. Basically, you're going to take at least 3 documents, and you can talk about the document's point of view, its purpose, its audience, its historical situation, and of course, connect it back to the prompt. All right, so what I tell my students to do is just do purpose. You don't have to have a different historical thinking skill for each one of those different documents that you source. Just take 3 or 4. I always tell 4 in case you mess up on one. Take 4 documents that you choose, any 4, explain the purpose of it and how it's related to the prompt. So now when you explain the purpose, you're not just telling what happens. You literally have to say, what is the purpose of this document? Like, what's it intended to do? Okay. So if I'm talking about the American Revolution again, I see Thomas Paine's Common Sense, of course, and I source that document. You explain what the document is, the purpose, and you need to say it. Once you explain what's going on in that document, of course, Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense in 1776 to inspire, hopefully to make colonists want to declare their independence. The purpose of this document is to explain or reflect that there was a push by Thomas Paine in 1776 to hopefully encourage people to motivate them to declare independence. You have to actually tell the purpose. Yes, tell what's going on for sure, acknowledge it, and also say what its purpose is, what it's intended to do. Okay, so sourcing shouldn't be that bad. Take 4 documents, at least 3, but you're kind of cutting it close because if you screw up on one, you're going to not get any points. You're just taking those documents, explaining the purpose, what's going on, what it was intended to do, and as always, you're connecting it back to the prompt. And finally, you got your complexity point, and that's the counter argument. Okay, and there's Bill. As you see here in the thesis statement, the very beginning, this dependent clause, is I've built in my counter argument before I get into the main part of my thesis. You build in the counter argument to organize yourself to get back to that complexity point. So even though I'm spending most of my paper explaining how no taxation without representation summarized the colonial resistance, and of course I've got my piece of evidence down here. They wanted a voting representative in Parliament. Now I'm going to go back up here and say, all right, now I'm ready to write my counter argument. So I'm going to explain how, some colonists, didn't want that. They wanted to be loyalists, wanted to remain in Britain. That could get the counter argument. I don't know 100%. There's no guarantee that a counter argument is going to be good enough to get the point from the grader. But a counter argument here, you're trying to find something that you can argue against and support it with evidence against the prompt. Or if you don't want to have the counter argument built in, try to connect this historical period and what happened with something else that was similar in another period of history. You could also get the complexity point that way as well. Okay, so DBQ is not as bad. My students, they can memorize all these things without even resorting to like any type of a rubric or anything. On the test, it will show you the tasks that it wants you to do. It's not going to explain it like this, but you will at least see the tasks. But my students can do it without it. They know thesis and context should kind of go together in an intro paragraph. They know context is leading up to what happened in history, the background, and then the thesis is your position that's defensible and clear and logical, and after it, what you're going to talk about, at least one piece of evidence or a concept that you're going to use to argue that point or that position that you have. They know to analyze all the documents. You've got to address the documents, group them together if you can, talk about what's going on in the documents, and more importantly, how it relates to the prompt. They know how to do that. Evidence beyond the document, that's not that bad. If you can think up something that's not in the document that you can argue that's not already there, there you go. Sourcing, take 4 documents, the author's purpose, what it's intended to do in relation to the prompt. That's not too bad. Complexity gets a little bit more difficult, but man, think of a counter argument, hook it to the front of your thesis if you can, or if you don't want to do that, try to explain, analyze, and connect how this time period is similar to another historical period in history. But that is the DBQ in a nutshell. I hope this video helped, and I also hope you'll like and subscribe and watch some more of our videos in the future.